Hello, good people of the internet. Welcome to the Unlearning Playground, an everyday life podcast by Chetan Narang. Okay, so before we jump into today's episode, I would want to spend a quick minute or so here talking about a few updates from my side. The biggest update is that the Unlearning Playground and all the rest of my work really now has a new face in the form of a website called www.chetannarang.org. You can go on to this address. The link is of course in the show notes. You can go on to the address and just have a look around. I have plans for this website to be the single seat for all of my current as well as future work. All the books that I'll be writing, all the podcasts that I'll be launching. Yes, plural for both of them. All of that will be readily available on this website. So make sure you go check it out and let me know your feedbacks. And another update with regards to the same website is that I have created a special page on this website. I've titled it Talk to Me. That page is dedicated for anyone who wants to have a personal one-on-one session with me. If you have any lurking questions about anything really, life, religion, spirituality, philosophy, your relationships, your jobs, careers, life in general, whatever. If you feel that I can help you out with them, I'm readily available now. So you can go onto the website, go onto that page and book a session with me and let's talk. And the third update from my side would be that this podcast, The Unlearning Playground, will now be a periodic podcast. So every other Friday, a new episode is going to drop. And of course, the details for the upcoming episodes will be available on my website readily and also on my social channels, primarily on Instagram. So if you're not connected there, make sure you give it a follow there as well. I think that's pretty much it. So without further ado, let's jump into today's episode. The topic that I've picked for today's episode is one that I really love to talk about. We're talking today about words and how they can be misinterpreted to mean anything really, anything that we want them to mean. Now, when I was designing my new website, which I would have just talked about in the prologue to this episode, I wanted it to follow a certain format. And the format that I've chosen for now is that every single page that you see on the website will have a quote on top and then the main content follows. Now the quote is either it is generally relevant to my work or it's specifically relevant to the page that you're on. Now when I was writing all of these quotes, of course they're from a lot of books that I've read or from authors or from podcasts that I might have consumed wherever. All of these quotes mean something to me. But I do realize that whenever I share these quotes, even on Instagram or with my friends, there are just so many varied interpretations of them that it's almost funny that, the same words can have so different meanings for different people. An example that lurks into my mind is actually related to my previous podcast episode. In that episode, I was talking in general about how what you are doing is kind of less important than how you're doing it. And a friend of mine, a very good friend of mine, when he heard that episode, this was the general theme, how over what. He listened to it and he forwarded me a video of another guru, another teacher who goes by the name Acharya Prashant. And this guy had made an entire video talking about how what you are doing is far more important than how you're doing it. And he asked me to resolve the difference. Now, he says that, dude, I respect both of you. I like both of your works, but this is something that is lurking in the middle for me. How do I go about it? Now, when I listen to Acharya Prashant, he's a guy who I respect a lot myself. I've listened to a few of his talks and his talks are really poignant. He really just picks out things that are supposed to, hurt you in some sense. And that is needed at times. So this guy really just is able to point out the mistakes in another person. And he talks about spirituality, philosophy, much along the same lines that I do. In this particular video, he was talking about how you are doing something is not really that important. And the example that he had picked was that if you're murdering someone, if you have a knife in your hand and you're cutting that person's neck, how beautifully you're cutting it, if you are the best swordsman going around and you can carve out a really beautiful cut, it still doesn't matter. You're still murdering that person. So what you are doing is far more important and far more relevant in this case than how you're doing it. And of course, I think any sane person would agree with him on this. I agree too. Of course, in this situation, how you're doing something is just stupidity to even consider. What you are doing is far more important here. But that does not mean that this applies 100% of the times. So the example that I used to explain this to my friend was via this Zen story. I don't think I've shared it on my podcast so far. I've definitely shared it on my Instagram. Allow me the pleasure to talk about that story a bit. Now, the story starts with two Zen monks. They are walking down a road and the weather is quite stormy. It's raining a lot. And while walking down the road, there is a bend where they see that a girl who's wearing a very beautiful silk dress and she's all drenched by the rain. She's standing there, unable to cross that turn in the road. Now, one of the monks goes up to her, lifts her up in his arms and helps her cross the road, and on the other side just drops her there and goes on his merry way. The other monk was absolutely shocked by what this guy had done. So he's just not talking to him, quite mad at him. And when they reached the monastery was when this guy finally broke his silence and talked to him, and he just reprimanded him for whatever he had done. He says that we monks should be staying away from women. They are a distraction to our practice and we should not even be talking to them, let alone be touching them. So what you did was quite reprehensible. And this other dude, he's just smiling back at him and he says, I left her there. Are you still carrying her with you? This manner of doing an act is what I meant when I said how you are doing something is much more important than what you are doing. When I speak about jobs, careers, and all the rest of our livelihood activities that we do, I really like to say that how you are doing those things is far more important than what you are doing. Because I believe that in the modern world, we have really just confused our means of livelihoods with our means to attain enlightenment for that matter, or attain fulfillment for that matter. We should not be confusing the two. So I talk about how you are doing your job, how you're going about your career. It is very important. And when I say how, what I mean is what you are expecting from your job, how attached you are to it. What is the outcome you expect? What is the result you expect that job, that career to have on your life? And so in that sense, how you're doing your job, how you're going about your life in that direction is far more important than what you are doing. I hope I've made my point. So words can be tricky in this sense. If you were to pick my quote and you were to say that it applies 100% of the times, of course it doesn't apply in the extreme example that Acharya Prashant gave. And if you were to pick his example, his quote, and you would say that that applies 100% of the times, of course it doesn't. I just gave you an example where how you're doing something is more important than what you are doing, right? Any sane person would say that the monk should have helped the girl. If she was not able to cross the road, he should have helped the girl. But how he's helping the girl is much more important. You should not be missing the context. This is where I feel that some of the core teachings of the Advaita Vedanta are really quite practical and quite pragmatic, especially when you apply it to these areas of your life. Now, when I talk about Advaita Vedanta, I'm not really talking about a particular book. I've read dozens of authors who talk about the Advaita Vedanta and even Zen Buddhism or even Hinduism for that matter. So this is layered around in all the books that I've read, but any author who's talking about true religion, true spirituality, true philosophy really does touch upon this principle. And what is that principle? In one manner of speaking, it is that you should clean your lens first, and only then should you go about applying what you have read, what you have consumed to your life. What do I mean by that? Whatever we see out in the world, whether it is a video that you have watched, whether it is somebody's words, someone you had a direct conversation with and you listen to that person talk, or whether it is even this podcast that you're consuming, anything at all, anything that comes into you is conditioned by the mental image, the mental models that you already have in place in your mind. And we all do. There is no running away from it. Now, these models are not really fixed as such. Some of them are, some of them aren't. But there are models nonetheless. And these models condition, they color whatever we perceive from the outside. And if these models are flawed, if the mental images that you already have in your head about this is the way life is, this is the way this person is, this is the way people are in general, etc., etc. I'm just layering into general themes here. If you have all of these mental images, and these images, these models themselves are incomplete, they themselves are not really based out of truths, no conclusions that you would draw from them would really be worth it. Or to put it in another manner, you could draw better conclusions from the same things that you would be consuming. And I see this as a general theme happening around all the time. I talk to a lot of people on Instagram, and there are times when they would forward me a video of some sane person talking about something, and their interpretation of what this sane person is talking about is just to conform to something that they already thought is the truth about life. I'm always amazed by it, but I do understand that this is because your own mental models have not really been unlearned yet. And that is why I talk about unlearning a lot. And this is the central teaching of the Advaita Vedanta that I'm talking about. You clean your lens first, you base your mental models out of truth, out of a clear, impartial understanding of the world, and then go about doing whatever feels right. And this is important. This order is important because it's almost become something that people consider to be morally right these days, to just tell another person, do whatever feels right. Now that is something which is almost childish to say to anyone and everyone, right? I mean, I know for a fact that I have been in certain life situations where I wasn't thinking straight. And I would have really loved for someone to tell me that in this situation, don't do what feels right to you because you're not thinking right. You cannot do what feels right when you're not thinking straight, right? So just in that sense, if you have aligned your own thinking, your own mental models towards what's true, towards what is actually right, you can then go about doing things that feel right. And this is also the essence of the concept of dharma in Eastern traditional philosophy. Following your heart, following something that moves you. Now, if you have not cleaned your lens, if you have not worked on yourself, what moves you in the modern world is just making more money. And if you are coming over to me and you're just talking about more ways to make more money, while what you need is really a cleaning of the lens first, I cannot really be advising you to go ahead and make more money. Of course, there is this Jim Carrey saying that I talked about in the previous episode too. He says that I think everyone should go around and make tons of money and be rich and famous and do everything that they want to, so that they understand that that is not the answer. But why he's saying that is precisely because he doesn't want you to waste the time to do all of those things, right? I hope you understand that. Discernment is the key to growing up. No matter what quote you read, no matter how many books you read, no matter how many podcasts you consume, if your own lens is not clean, if you cannot discern between where this particular thing applies and where this does not apply, you cannot really be making the best decisions you could have been making. It reminds me of that beautiful quote that I really just keep quoting around. If a pickpocket meets a saint, all he sees are the pockets. And in this particular situation, it's almost obvious to me that everyone wants to feel like the saint. Everyone wants to feel as if I am the one who's getting misinterpreted. While more often than not, we are also pickpockets. We misinterpret people all the time. We misinterpret situations. We misinterpret quotes. We misinterpret books. We misinterpret podcast episodes all the time. So, if all you can see are the pockets, not saying that the pockets aren't there, but if all you see are the pockets, it is your lens that needs a cleaning, not the saint. So, having said all of that, if you have listened to anything in this podcast from myself, if you have read something from me and you downrightly disagree with it, I would not know if you wouldn't tell me. And if you would tell me, maybe we can clear away the fog. Maybe we can have an honest discussion, and maybe all the dissonance is that what you interpret from what I was saying is not really what I meant when I was saying those things. So if there is anything like that, make sure you reach out to me. I am readily available, as I spoke about in the prologue to this podcast. So I am readily available. Make sure you reach out to me and we'll have a heart-to-heart discussion. So with that, we come to the end of this episode. I would really like to thank you from the bottom of my heart if you stayed with me till here and if you appreciated the content. Of course, I would want to plug in the website again. There is a new website available for all of my work. It is available at www.chetannarang.org. You can check the link from the show notes below as well. All of the effort behind this website is actually to get this podcast and others of my content out to more and more people. I'm playing my part in doing all of those things, but I would also want to request you to play your part by leaving me a rating or a review, and a review in fact, on any of your podcast platforms of choice. Wherever you're listening to this episode, just leave me a rating, leave me a review, and share it with your community. And I hope to see you in the playground for the next episode. Until next time, peace out.